job of leading their team and leading their church through several different great adventures. Led the church and held it together through 3 different pastors, and some great transitions in those moments. And we were trying to get somebody to talk to us about the logistics and the kind of the admin side, the part that all of us hate, right? It's like, I haven't met very many church planners. Rick's one of those exceptions, perhaps, that admin's not a huge stretch for him. But for the most part, I don't find a whole lot of church planners that go, I can't wait to get to my computer in the morning to look at my emails. And so most of them are like, hey, I sent you an email last month. It's like, oh yeah, I was going to check that. It's like, okay, great, glad to hear you're going to check that.
Team blue approach.
Yeah. I check mine faithfully every week. Once. So, no, I do try to get to it bi-daily. Is that a word, bi-daily? Just so you know what's coming up next week, next month, we're going to talk about millennials and get a panel discussion together, get some millennials in here, and just have you do some Q&A and try to hopefully get you thinking, what does that look like? I want you to bring your best ideas of the young people that you're reaching in your church. You know, we're gonna say 30 and under, and some of you guys are 30 and under, you know, and so we want to hear from you because if we're going to keep reaching people for Christ, we've got to continue to think outside the box. And what are we doing to reach people that are far from Jesus? May we never get comfortable with methods. May we never get comfortable with what worked for us last generation and even not last year, because things are shifting at a pace that are crazy. Let's open in prayer, and then I'm going to turn it over to Lee. I know he has something else he has to go to. He's not going to get to do lunch with us. So Lee, if you would, after you get done, as much time as you have, open for Q&A. Okay? Lord, we thank you so much that you give us the privilege of being your hands and feet. And God, may we not take that for granted. May we take the admonition of your word and consider the responsibility of a shepherd as important. And Lord, may we be willing to lay our lives down for the sheep. God, speaking for most of us in the room, we hate administration. We really wish you'd have given us a little bit higher level of the gift of organization. And so it's a bit of a struggle for us, God. So I pray that as Lee shares, God, that there be some aha moments for us in the room, that maybe a couple of nuggets he would share would really help us to figure out how to get better or find somebody that is better. Pray, God, that you would continue to encourage the guys that are in the room. Lord, you know, some of these fellows have come and they are beat down. They've had a family leave recently that was important to them. They've had a death in their church. They've had someone they discipled walk away from you, Lord. They've had somebody that they thought was so close to salvation only to turn further away, Lord. They've walked through this junk just this week and this month and all that, Lord, probably on a salary that would make a public school teacher quit and walk away in a heartbeat. And so, God, we just pray that you would refresh and encourage those in the room today. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Do you need the board? Okay. You have a marker? No, a little dry erase? I'll get you one.
I don't need it right away.
Okay, I'll get you. That one's dry erase. Yeah, that's dry erase.
Well, I'm real excited about, after Steve's introduction, say, may we never get used to the way things have always been done, and so that's basically, I was going to tell you the way we do things, so. Nice to meet y'all.
That would be way ahead of the way we've never done it.
Yeah.
Now, what I want to do today is, as I was standing there chatting with Steve, he kind of went around and kind of told me a little bit about everybody's here, but I kind of want to take a little bit more time to do that. First of all, I want to say thanks to Steve. Steve has been a good friend to me personally, and he's been a good friend to Stevens Street. When Stevens Street, our pastor who had been there 20 years, The church had grown from about 100 in worship to about 1,000 in worship under this guy's leadership. Left to just do itinerant preaching. He didn't leave to go to another church. He just left to go to do itinerant preaching. Steve called and said, what can we do to help? And he actually filled the pulpit for us. Left the river one Sunday and came and preached for us during that interim period, and I'm grateful for that. During another transition time, Steve was a great counselor for me personally as we went through another tough pastor transition. So I'm really grateful for him. Also grateful for Rick. Rick, I've never met anyone in my life who has got as big a heart as Rick does, who loves this world so much that he will do anything to just meet a need. And I'm impressed by that, and I appreciate it. I appreciate your kindness and your care for people is contagious. I appreciate that.
That's good.
With that said, I want to go around the room and just have. I want you to tell me a couple things. I want you to tell me your name and what. Now, this is not your chance to preach.
I'll put a timer so how much time you want? 2 minutes each?
I want you to tell me your name and why you feel led to church planting, and what you 4 things. Your name, why you feel led to church planting, what is your absolute favorite thing about church planting, and what do you like the least? I don't want to use the word hate, but what do you like the least, or what do you fear the most? That could be the 4th answer. And we're going to go through this pretty quickly, and then when we get back around to this side of the table, then I'll kind of do the same thing. Not about church planting, because I'm not a church planter, but your name, why you love, why church planting? What is it that called you to that? What was there a moment in time? Was there something that can really encourage all of us? And then favorite thing and least favorite thing. Okay. We're going to skip Steve because we don't have time for his answer.
I'm Josh Cardwell at Revolution Church up in Crossville. Why church planting? Because I believe it's the most effective way to see people get saved. And that's the whole reason I got into it. Is because I was like, yeah, I'm looking for churches is great and everything, but I wasn't built that way. The gift of evangelism, I think, is something I hope to see work out in my life. The favorite thing about church planting is definitely the freedom. You know, you can preach things you can't preach at old school churches. You can do crazy things that you could never do at old school churches. The least favorite thing about church planting is the revolving door of people. Because it is, especially if you're going to grow. Because, you know, your people that like it at 100 aren't going to like it at 200, and they're going to leave you. And then people at 300 that like it at 200 aren't going to like it at 300, and they're going to leave you, you know. And so, but, yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Tim Mears, Tree City Church. I'm deacon out there. Church planting is one of the most effective ways to start reaching people, because you're not stuck in a rut like you are with a traditional church. So one of the favorite things is getting to try things that's new and different and thinking outside the box. So that's for the least favorite thing. I have to say it's the harvest is many and the workers are few. So the downside to church planting, I think.
Kevin Lawrence, I'm the pastor at Tree City in McMinnville. It was easy to plant in McMinnville because that's home for me, and I see on Facebook and MySpace and Twitter box and all that crap about. I mean, my peers. I'm 36. My peers are almost universally lost and dying and going to hell, and that's why church planting is because I've invited them to traditional church as a kid and it didn't take. So why would it take now? Favorite thing would be, I'd have to echo Josh, the freedom. I mean, you don't like it, there's plenty of churches doing it the old way. And as far as, I'd say my biggest fear is failure.
I'm Tony Glass, going to be leading the church plant in Livingston. We're calling it the Imperfect Church right now, and that kind of goes into the why. As I was working on a factory line up in Livingston, and just the people you meet, are never going to step foot in any kind of traditional church out there. And just when I saw that, God broke my heart and said, "You've got 500 coworkers around you. How many of them do you think actually know me?" And it's that moment of, well, from what I've seen. So it's just like, we talk about, go overseas where there's a big need, or these countries where the percentage is less than 1%. It's like, well, I might have been the only guy in that factory who had anything to do with God in their life. So there's a 1% right there. So God broke my heart for that area. That's why church planting, because as I've been up in that area, those traditional churches aren't going to reach the kind of people that I was working with. And that's kind of, again, I think what these guys are saying, that brings in the freedom that comes with that church plant, that I can say, well, how can I make this to meet those people? How can I really aim for them, because those are the people I want to get. And that's probably been my favorite thing so far. Least favorite thing, I guess, is just when you're first starting up, that somewhat aloneness feeling you get, which is why groups like this are really important, but you feel like you're kind of the one man out there, maybe doing it with a few other people, so until you get that team going, that can be very difficult, I think.
Yeah, my name's Bud Houston, and so I'm not planning a church, but I'm super passionate about it. And so if I had to introduce myself, I'm the missions and outreach pastor here at the River. And so, but why church planting? And so I would say it a little bit differently. I think everybody would say it the same way, but I think church planting is a result of evangelism and discipleship, and I'm passionate about evangelism and discipleship. I think church planting leads into maturity because you've got to train leaders and equip them, and in a traditional sense, there's less urgency in that. And so I think discipleship is actually greater and a force to evangelism. My favorite thing about church planting is seeing church planters want to plant other churches, and just that passion and vision for that. And my least favorite thing, and so not to discount what you said about a fear of failure, but my least favorite thing is when people say church plants fail. And I would say this to every person in here, is a church plant doesn't fail if you're doing it in the name of Jesus to the glory of God, whatever the outcome is. It's not a failure.
My name is Joshua Young, and I'm in Clarksville, Tennessee, planting a church called Redeeming Hope. I knew Bud, so he invited me here, and it's nice to see you guys, so thanks for having me. Why church planting? I mean, for me, a few reasons. One, I've been in it for about 10 years, since my early 20s. But seeing how people can find and follow Jesus in unique ways in church planting. It's not like traditional churches don't do that, but there's a unique apostolic movement that happens when people start following Jesus. And that just leads into my favorite part, which is my favorite time of the week is 6 a.m. on Tuesdays, 6 a.m. on Wednesdays, and 6 a.m. on Saturdays, where we meet at coffee shops, and people show up to our house, show up to coffee shops, they're reading the scriptures consistently, they're praying, they're seeking to follow Jesus. There's nothing better. My wife had a group over at our house on Thursday night, and I was just so happened to be going out as they were coming in, and I teared up. I was just like, I'm looking at these ladies, and they're reading the scriptures, they're praying, some of them for the first time in their life, and they're getting captivated by grace. And it is just unbelievable to see that. So I stopped, and I started tearing up, and I said, this is the real work, is to believe the gospel consistently for your life. And it's just hearing that, I've never heard this before. And just seeing people, the weight is lifted off of guilt, shame, condemnation. It just is like, it wakes me up in the morning. That's what wakes me up at 6 a.m. every morning. I'd say the least favorite is when I see people come close, and I see people just on the edge. And the cares of life, the cares of the world, pride of life pulls them back. It keeps me awake at night. It really does. It grieves me. It grieves my wife. So those are that's the difficulty, the heartbreak of pouring your life to people.
I'm Steve Muzon. I moved up from Florida to Seymour, Tennessee 1 year ago this week. Became pastor of Grace Baptist Church in Seymour. That lasted till September the 9th when they fired me. Our church started growing, and I think it became a threat to the power structure. and they called a business meeting totally behind my back, and on a Sunday morning voted me out. And so when that vote occurred, there were about 35 of us that walked out to the parking lot and just in shock and upset, and how can things like this happen? Within a couple of days, people were calling me and saying, "Pastor, please don't leave Seymour. Please stay around here, and if you could stay and be our pastor, whatever it takes." So 2 weeks later, we started a meeting. That was September 23rd, and there were 32 of us that came that Sunday. Our highest attendance so far has been 55. We've had over 100, about 110 people visit us now on Sunday mornings. We're about 6 miles down the road. My favorite thing about church planning is the surprise of it all. I never in my whole life thought that I would be a church planner. This is a whole new concept to me. I left a pastorate in Jacksonville, Florida, where I had been over 26 years as pastor.
Wow.
And so I had a long-term, really successful, happy ministry down there, but did feel led to come to Tennessee. And as somebody said to me, "Well, Steve, now we know why God really wanted you to come up to Tennessee." My son-in-law, Nick Swarthout, a lot of you have met Nick. He's full-time chaplain at the King's Academy, and he's had on his heart to plant a church. But for various things have come up, and he hasn't been able to do that. And now he just wants to be my right-hand man and say, God has sent you up here, let's do this. And we are really excited. My favorite thing is the excitement about it, the freshness, the excitement, the no boundaries kind of attitude. My most fearful thing is, how do I take these 30 good Southern Baptist people who have done church for decades the way they have done church, and shift their paradigm and show them a new direction. And I'm a little bit nervous about that myself, but I'm really excited about what God's going to do. And I think doors are opening for us all along the way, and we're really excited. Yeah.
I'm Rick Burnett at Crossroads Church. Why church planning is because God wouldn't leave me alone. It's the short version of it. We'd spent 2 years praying with Steve for a church planner for Baxter. And after watching 4 guys meet with a core group, get excited, and then back out, it was a roller coaster for that group. Asking God, why are you doing this to those people? And his answer was, because I've been getting you ready. Shut up and go. Not something I ever thought I would do. I was talking earlier, I'm the square peg in church planning because I do like administration, at least partially. And I'm not I can't do the spiky hair because I don't have hair. But that's where I am. My favorite.
You get tight jeans though.
That's what makes sense.
If I'm doing tight jeans, it's because I just finished Christmas and ate way too much. It's not a fashion statement. My favorite parts of church planning, the first one is just seeing people be real in our congregation. When we try something and it bombs, and one of our ladies says, "That sucked, don't do it again." I love that response much better than, "Oh, bless your heart, that was such a good day." I love the reality of the folks that God has drawn to us. My other favorite part is watching God launch new people into ministry and new churches out of us. I don't consider myself a church planner. I am the launching pad. I am not the rocket. That's the way God has wired me. And I enjoy that about as much as anything else. When one of our folks, we've got a guy living in Haiti who was 25 years out of church and came to us about 3 years ago after a very messy journey away from church and away from faith. He's living in Haiti now, has been for a year and a half. Chose to spend his retirement money selling his home and basically burning through his retirement so he could go live and serve in Haiti, helping those find the gospel who are there. That excites me more than anything I do. My least favorite, my greatest fear, I'll echo Kevin, is failure. And the great news is I'm 11 years in and we failed. So if you're in that fear, don't worry about it. God still works even when you fail. So we don't have the exciting scoreboard, scorecard. I'm not we went from 0 to 800 in 6 months guy. We're 0 to 50 in almost 11 years. We're slower than a Kia hatchback, but that's all right. God's doing fun things in that Kia. So that is my greatest fear. My least favorite part of church planning is one of the reasons I didn't ever want to plant a church, is a battle we all face. It's arrogance. The guys I knew in seminary that went into church planning all were going to go 0 to 800 in 6 months because they were the only ones that were ever going to do church right, and they were going to teach all the rest of us what we were doing wrong. I see that on both sides. I see it in my traditional church friends who, we don't need another church, we got plenty here, we're already doing okay. Yeah, but 80% of our community is going to hell.
Right.
But I also see it in some of my church planning friends where we're going to straighten out all those traditional churches who've messed it up. That's my least favorite part of church planning on both sides of it. As the square peg who's somewhere in the middle of the two, that I see it on both sides of us and in me.
My name is Jim Floria. I'm in Knoxville at Forward Church. Why church planning? Because I remember the moment that I was called and I can't shake it. I've attempted to shake it for 2 years and can't shake it. Careers don't satisfy it when you got a calling itch that you can't scratch. And so that's why I don't want to be swallowed up by a fish like Jonah. I want to be obedient. My favorite part, man, everything everybody said, there's so many favorite parts. Kind of the idea that what Josh said and some other guys said is true. Freedom, but not freedom to just run wild, but it scratches the entrepreneurialness that God put inside me too, and just the desire to start and to be inventive and to try things that have never been tried. But my least favorite part, as of right now, is the exact opposite of that. Trying to learn to be consistent and to slow down and to really care. I don't mean that in a way that I don't care, but to really walk with people and to balance that internal drive that I have with the idea that there's got to be some sort of structure, and structure is the least thing that you would describe me as. So, but I love the push. I love the push a lot. So.
My name is David Reedy. I'm a church planning resident, so I haven't planted a church. I'm still in the learning phase. But why? I think I would say the same thing as Rick, is God won't leave me alone. So my favorite part so far is watching people grow and meeting people and building those relationships. My least favorite thing is probably putting stuff into steps. I hate doing that. Makes my head hurt.
My name is Gary Knowlton. I work with Lampstand Church and have been with Crossroads Community Church for about a year. And I'm doing nothing with Lampstand Church right now. Eventually, I need to plant a church here in Cookeville, and I'm not really sure what that's going to look like. And I know definitively I don't want to do that by myself. My wife and I did that once, and it almost ruined our marriage. And I'm a little narcissistic. I'd rather save my marriage than keep that going. But we're in a better place now, and we're ready to go out, but I just don't want to do it by myself. And Rick, we've known of each other for a while, and we've got to share that story. So he's kind of like that, okay, you're being weird, go and do your thing now. So, like, if that makes sense. Why I feel led to plant a church, honestly, when I was younger in my walk, I could plead with you emotionally on why I think I should be a church planner, and I think the more mature me would say what John says in Revelation, man, worthy is the lamb that was slain to receive the reward of his suffering, of people from every tribe, nation, and culture. And that's the motivation for every believer. It doesn't matter if you feel like it or not, go evangelize. Go evangelize. And so I had a passion, and I still have a passion to plant a church, but I know that passion is fleeting. I have a passion, I love my wife, most of the time that passion fails. And I don't live out of my feelings, I live out of obedience. My favorite thing about church planting is getting to see people's worldviews challenged. They're not going to believe the gospel unless someone goes and challenges their worldview with the gospel. And that's my favorite thing, getting to see those aha moments in themselves, and they're like, oh, Jesus isn't like Zeus. You know, he's not like Hera. He's not like the gods that were once, you know, normative. And that's always a breath of fresh air for me. The thing I like the least about church planting is how, honestly, Christians undermine one another with biblical illiteracy. And we turn church planting into building a business and making it a numbers game instead of evangelizing people. And that's my least favorite thing, because we can both say church planting, but our terms are diametrically opposed to one another. Because I'm not talking about building a business. I'm talking about seeing people saved. And so that's disheartening sometimes when we can't play well together and what have you.
I'm Ben Hull, church planting resident here at the River, and I've also been honored to be asked to serve as the campus pastor for a new campus that we're going to be launching here in a couple weeks, and we're excited about that. Why church planting? I think it's because it seems like that's what God's doing right now. I just being completely transparent. I don't know that I ever grew up thinking, man, I want to plant a church. You know, I was the shy, backward kid in the back of the room, and God has put a calling in my heart, in my life, and it's something that I know is bigger than me, because it's not anything I would have chosen for myself, and. So yeah, it seems like that's what God's doing right now. Maybe this is part of both my my why and also my favorite. I'm very thankful that I don't have to conjure up the work of God on my own. There's a whole lot about my life and my story. God called us out of state. We've lived in 3 different states now, my wife, my family, mine. Right at the end of my pastorate in Florida, we had a great little community there, a small Baptist church we were pastoring, and God really saved a lot of people and raised up some great leaders, and we had a great team, and it looked like things were just really going well, and God started moving our hearts away from there. My parents became ill, and just really felt the responsibility, that weight of what they were dealing with, and felt like God was moving us, and just didn't understand that. Ended up coming here and not pulling my family out of everything they'd known. We'd spent 8 years there, almost 8 years, pastoring this church, and just had my kids, every little milestone you can measure in their lives, they experienced there. Every friend they had, every relationship, every school they'd been to, they were all there. And our life was there, and we just couldn't understand, why is God pulling us away? And I knew it was partly because of my parents. I knew it had to be more than that. And once we got here and got more plugged in at the River, we'd been fans of the River for years. My younger sister and her husband had been coming to the River for almost since its inception, and just loved it. Absolutely loved Steve and loved the staff here and all the friends and the community that they built. And the mission of the River was contagious, and they loved it. And we ended up coming here, and our very first Sunday, I'll never forget this. My wife and I, we were struggling, and Steve was out in the lobby, and we're dealing with all of this, and just shared with him that we were struggling, and we had just adopted our daughter, and just dealing with a whole lot of things. And Steve prayed with us right there in the middle of 1,000 people right in the lobby, and I'll never forget that. And that was the first time that I think I saw his big heart for people. He didn't know us at all, and he spent time leading us, and that was cool. That was a good moment. But from that point on, we were hooked. We felt like that's what God was doing. We were here, and we didn't know exactly what that would look like. Started volunteering and getting more plugged in, and eventually Steve started talking to us about the residency, and I gotta wrap this up. Anyway, started doing the residency, and there were so many things about our life here. I grew up here, was gone for 20 years, came back, couldn't figure out why, and now this thing had been on Steve's heart and many of the other hearts of people in our staff. This area that God is growing and building up, and there's all this community and all these new people in the area and things like that. And is this what God's doing? And He asked us to consider the residency. And I come to find out, he didn't know this at the time, but I graduated from Upperman. And I just, it's so many things. Again, my favorite thing has been seeing God do something bigger than me, bigger than my capability. And he's been bringing together people who are on fire for Him. He's been enabling us to connect with people and other pastors. I love hanging out. I've been hanging out with Rick a lot, and I'm excited to be able to partner with him to reach out in the community, and just so many great things God's done that are bigger than anything I can do on my own. And that's my favorite part, seeing God do some great things. And I can't wait to see what He continues to do. My least favorite part is also recognizing that I can't do any of this on my own. But it also leads to that moment where I recognize my weakness and find God's strength. So.
My name is Craig Connor. I'm also one of the residents here. Why church planting? When I got asked to be one of the residents, I told Steve, like, I don't think I feel called to plant a church. He's like, that's okay. Well, come on. It's going to be, a great opportunity to learn and to grow and to be invested in. Just get some great hands-on training. So I'm still in that place of like, I don't know if I'm called to plant a church, but I'm a part of the church plant, the campus that's going out. And it's been really exciting. I love being a part of this work. So my favorite part of it, of what we're doing, I think, is just seeing God open doors. Through this process, I have seen God work in ways that's, there's no way it's coincidence. There's no way that some businesses are coming in. There's multiple housing complexes that are going up there. You see certain people that are coming to be a part of the team, and like you just see God working, just interweaving everything perfectly, and it's really cool and exciting to see. So just seeing God move in a new way. I think the least favorite part for me, and this is probably just unique to me, is almost like a fear of the unknown. It's just like, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know what's next, and so it's kind of a both end. Like God's got this, but I don't know what that looks like. It's hard to be in that place for me. So.
James Dean, New Day Church. Why church plant? That's a good question. In that I pastored in what we would call traditional Southern Baptist churches, a few of them over several years. Last year was 30 years in ministry, and kind of came to the realization over time that I felt like the church, as it was structured and the things that it would do, wasn't really reaching our culture and reaching people. And the Lord really, to be honest, I didn't realize it at the time, but probably over a period of several years was kind of plowing into me a little bit about that, and maybe a new approach and different things. And the Lord then, we partnered in the church I was pastoring with some church plants. And I think seeing that up close also gave me kind of the bug of church planting. And so we stepped out a little more than a year ago to plant a church. And I think when I think about the favorite part of it is really learning to depend on God. We all say we trust God. And I'm not trying to be skeptical at all, because I'm not that kind of person. But, I would have said I trusted God all the way through on things. But when you step out to something new and have church buildings and regular salary and church staff and all those things, you learn to depend on God, and He is faithful.
Amen.
And I just continue. It's small things, but continue to see His hand at work, and so it's been the favorite part. It's kind of sparked something new in my own heart, personally. The least favorite, well, that's what I just told you. I was used to having everything. And I'm kind of that steady Eddie personality, and administration isn't hard for me, but just marching right on along, and as you know, it's something new every day, every week. And I feel like I don't know nearly enough, and so I kind of feel like, why me? Why am I doing this? Not questioning the call, but I mean, of being able to actually do what needs to be done. And so that's been the least part, the fear part then too, of just, you know, so it's that battle between the favorite and the fear.
I'll tell you, is this an eraser?
Yeah.
That's a cool eraser. I'll tell you, even if we don't learn anything about church administration, I'm encouraged after having heard all your stories. Man, what a room full of people that God wants to use, and I'm honored to be here. And Rick, just so you know, I did plan on this part taking a while. So I'm not thinking to myself, oh no. One thing that I heard, is this the one you use? One thing that I heard that seemed to be, that's not right, was your love for people, the way people respond, the way people don't respond. That's what I heard all the way around the table. God has put in you a love for people. All people. And that's why you want a church plant, because everybody said, I've got more freedom. I can do more things. I can reach more people. I can reach people at the factory that won't darken a church, won't darken a traditional church. I love people so much, I'm willing to do what it takes to church plant. My favorite thing is that the way people respond when they hear the gospel. My least favorite thing is that people all hear the gospel and they don't respond. My biggest fear is failure. Failure of what? That what I'm doing is not reaching people. And so I did not hear, why church planting? Because I make a lot of money. I did not hear, my least favorite thing is admin. I did not hear that. I did not hear that people go, man, I hate administration. Now, and then, what's your name? Jim. Jim said, I don't like to be structured, but I feel the need to be. So this is what, to me, the boiling down church administration to one thing is your personal integrity, your calling as it relates to people. That's what church administration is. That's why it's important. Because you can do all the things that y'all are talking about, and if you don't do things in order, at least in some order, then you're putting your people at risk. You're creating unnecessary risks that church administration helps mitigate. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about myself. I grew up the son of a bivocational pastor. My dad pastored a church. He was a principal of Greenback High School. So all you guys that pastor in East Tennessee, I grew up in the shadows, under the shadows of Neyland Stadium in Maryville, Tennessee. And that's where I'm from. My dad pastored a small church in Walland, Tennessee, which is just across the border to Sevier County near Seymour. And he pastored a little country church, bivocational, for years. They did eventually call him full-time, where Sunday school had to start at a certain time because all the dairy farmers had to milk first before they could make it to church. And that's how I grew up. I grew up in a church that ran about 100 for the whole time my dad was there. He was there about 15 years. And then he left to go to another church and was at that church for 26. Just retired, and he's 70, and he's now an interim pastor of a church that runs about 50. So I've grown up in a hymn singing, shotgun aisle, traditional Baptist church. That's how I grew up. I grew up in the household of a pastor, and he loves people too. My daddy loves people, and he cares about people, and he is heartbroken about people, and he loves to see people saved. What I would say was hard for me as a pastor's kid was to watch my dad do everything. In these small churches, he had to do it all. And one day he threw his back out because he was up on a ladder changing the sign outside the church. And this is the day that I go back to when I talk about my personal calling. I was 16 years old. I am 48. I was 16 years old, and and my dad was kind of laying with the ice on his back and couldn't move, and was trying to study for a sermon, and was answering calls about the parking lot needing striped and whatever. And I remember in this moment in my living room saying to my dad, "Dad, why were you changing the sign? Is there not anybody else that can do that?" And my dad said, "Well, son, it's a small church, and now these guys work, and it's just hard for them to find time. I just have to do it." And at that point, at age 16, God pricked my heart, and He said, "Lee, I'm going to use you and the experience you have growing up in a pastor's home to be a support to a pastor. I'm not calling you to preach, praise God, if you guys ever heard me preach. I'm not calling you to preach, I'm calling you to support. And I'm going to tell each one of you, we don't grow on trees, like there are not that many of us, but there are other Lee Baileys out there that God has put a calling that says that doesn't want us. He's not asking us to preach and to lead a church. He's asking us to come beside. And there are guys out there, if you find them, they will do anything for you. At whatever church I was at, and I'll tell you, I thought that I was going to do this as a volunteer. I never dreamed. Growing up in a church with 100 people, there was the pastor, and there was a part-time music leader, and there was a volunteer youth guy. So never once did I even know that other positions in churches existed. I didn't even know there was a minister of education or whatever, a missions pastor. I didn't know that stuff existed. Had no idea there was such a thing as an administrator. So when God put that call on my heart, it was going to be volunteer. So I went to school and got my degree in business, and I went into banking. The whole idea was to find a church and to come alongside the pastor and say, "How can I help you?" That was the whole idea of my calling. And I'm telling you, there are guys out, if this is not your thing, there are guys out there that want to help you. They want to. They want to feel like they're a part of this, but God's not called them to preach. And for most of you, prepping to preach is invigorating. When I have to prep to preach, it's like being hooked up at Medic, and they're draining blood from me. I mean, I can do it, but it sucks the life out of me. Thinking about putting, 15, 20, 30, however many hours a week you put in for a sermon on Sunday morning, just sucks the life out of me. And for some of you, you can't wait to do it again. And I'm like, one time's all I need. I can do it once and then give me 6 months. But the point is that I'm not driven to do that. You guys are. And so there are people out there that are driven to come beside you and say, "How can I help you change the sign on the church? How can I help you do that?" Now, with that said, I want to just, because I know you came here hoping to learn some things about administration. I want to go back to this people thing, and I want to say that the biggest thing that we want to do through church administration is mitigate risk. Not because you're afraid of lawsuits, not because you're afraid of losing money, but because you care for your people. And I've heard that all the way around this table. So there are 4 primary things that you want to mitigate risk. Property as you have it, people, yourself, and finances. Finance. We'll just say finance. Money. So, if you don't have property, if you don't own property, Stevens Street is the church I'm at is a traditional Baptist church. We have 100,000 square feet of heated and cooled space. We are a big church with big properties. Okay, so a lot of you guys aren't dealing with that, but the scale is still the same. You have to protect your property, and that means not because you want your property to look nice, but because you want to make it safe for your people. We recently had a lady who was probably in her late 80s. She was on a walker and was carrying behind her an oxygen tank. And she was getting sick, sitting on the back row of the church, getting sick, and went to leave, and she tripped on our rug that was just outside, just inside the doors going outside. She tripped and fell on her oxygen tank, and broke her leg in half.
Oh my gosh.
And did I care about her suing us? I did. Did I care about us losing money on that? Yeah, but I cared about her. I cared about Miss Shirley, and I hated that Miss Shirley was hurt, and it just broke my heart that Miss Shirley, and as we looked at it, those rugs have little curls in them. So if you don't pick up your feet, you're going to catch your foot on them. So the first thing we did, unfortunately, was after an accident, is we replaced them, because I don't want Miss Shirley hurt. So you have to mitigate the risks of your property. That also means insurance, making sure you have proper insurance for theft and casualty and storms and flooding and whatever. We had a trailer stolen out of our parking lot, and it had a whole bunch of chainsaws and stuff in it, and we have insurance for that. You're smart enough to know that. Even if you hate administration, you're smart enough to know you need insurance on your vehicles, on your property, and I'll get to liability in just a minute. And then you want to protect your people. You need to make good decisions about where your people are, especially in light of children. You need to mitigate the risk of one of your people being hurt in a situation where you could have avoided it. So you know this. Don't put a 18-year-old boy over a classroom of 7-year-old girls. You know that. And so don't do it out of expediency. If that's all you've got, don't have the class. Don't put your people at risk. That is so important. Put them in the sanctuary. Do something. Don't put, well, that's all we've got today. Don't do it. Don't unnecessarily put your people at risk. And then don't unnecessarily put yourself at risk, and also mitigate the risk of yourself. And that means carry liability insurance. That also means protect yourself. It means don't meet with another lady behind closed doors if you don't have somebody around. And then And then protect your finances. When you're taking up an offering, which I'm assuming all y'all take up offerings, I don't know how these church plans work. I don't know. People, if everybody gives by electronic transfer or phone or whatever. But anytime you have cash or checks, you need to make sure that that's taken care of in an accountability kind of way. You need to make sure that multiple people are handling the money, that not one person has the power. You need to protect yourself. So these 4 areas, you need to just protect yourself. It doesn't matter if you're good at answering emails. It doesn't matter if you're good at structure. It doesn't matter if you feel like that you're really good at tax law or administration. There are so many resources out there. There's no way we could cover everything that administration is important in an hour or a day or a month or a year. There's so much. To finish my story, I was in banking for 12 years. And I got to the point where I was vice president of commercial lending at a bank in Sevierville. And I was dealing with millionaires all day long, loving it. And at some point, God took the joy away. I hated going to work. And it was at that point that I think God spoke to me, and He reminded me at age 16 what God had said. And He said, I'm going to call you into doing this full time now. So I left the banking world and went into church administration. So anyway, that's I meant to finish that story later. So we want to mitigate the risk of these 4 areas, and so that just means doing it right. If you're going to rightly divide the word of truth, you need to also rightly protect the things that God's given you control over. It's just a matter of being a man of integrity. So there's 3 principles, and then I'll close with this. Principles of mitigating risk. So number 1 is the principle of isolation. As instances of isolation go up, risk goes up. So you need to always be, when you're thinking about administration and any of these things right here, the more you are alone or your people are alone, your risk goes up. The more you are by yourself or someone is by themselves, your risk goes up. So you've got to mitigate that. Number 2 is the principle of accountability. As your accountability goes up, your risk goes down. And so, as it relates to finances, the more people that you have at Stevens Street, I can sign checks, but I can't cut them. Like, I don't even know how. I can approve expenses, but I can't make journal entries into our computer. I don't have the access. Our CPA, he can't sign any checks. He can't approve any expenses. He can't do any journal entries. He reconciles the bank statement separately off-site. We have a business manager at the church who cuts the checks, but she can't approve them. And so we have all this dual control going on because we want to have as much accountability as possible because we want to have as much risk, reduce as much risk as possible. Same thing as it relates to people in classrooms. Same thing as it relates to, all these 4 categories. Protecting yourself, the more people you have in your circle, the more you're going to be held accountable, the lower your risk of burnout, the lower your risk of making mistakes, the lower your risk of getting in trouble, the lower your risk of doing something that you shouldn't do in a weakened condition. And finally, there is the principle of power and control. The more prevalent there is the more there is an imbalance. The more there's an imbalance, the greater the risk. of power and control. And someone mentioned, I think Rick mentioned, that one of his concerns going into church planting was related to arrogance and things like that. So you began to think that your way is the right way. You began to take on an attitude of, I'm in control, do what I say, I'm in charge. And then your risk goes up as you begin to think that it's you, your power, your control, and there's a great imbalance between you and everybody else around you. There's a great imbalance of power. Your risk goes way up. Your ability to make decisions without advisors, your ability to make decisions about finances, your ability to make decisions about whatever it is that you guys do, as you are able to make decisions without somebody there to balance you. That it's one thing to have accountability where somebody else is in the room. It's another thing entirely that someone has the ability to check you. You give them the power to check you and to say, I don't know if this is a good idea or not. And you listen to them. The greater there is an imbalance of power, the greater the risk is. So what I would say to you guys is, whether you're in a traditional church planting, whether you haven't planted a church yet, your calling is critical. What God's called you to do is critical, because He's called you to love people. That's what I heard around this table. It's so encouraging. He's called you to love people. He's called you to follow Him blindly. He's called you to do what He says, even though you don't know the results, you don't know what's going to happen, the fear of the unknown. He's called you to do all those things. And in doing that, because you love your people, not because you're afraid of lawsuits, not because you're afraid of losing money, not because you're afraid of your perception in the community, but because you love your people, you want to mitigate the risks here and take care of the people that you are that are faithfully giving to you. Take care of that. Take care of yourself. Make sure that you stay strong, because a lot of times, unfortunately, I say unfortunately because this is the nature. There are people here at the river that are here because God called them here. There are other people here, and Steve knows this, that are here because they love Steve to be. My wife. and the thing is, you can't get away from that. People are drawn to Steve. I love Steve. People are drawn to Steve and love Steve, and so you have to take care of yourself and you have to protect yourself, because a personal failure will crush the river. It will crush it. I'm not saying it'll kill it, because God's here, but it will hurt badly. So you have to protect yourself. You got to protect your people. You got to protect your premises, your property. And I'll close with this quick story. When I was still in banking, my son, who's 19 now, he was just born, and when he was born a month early, and we went to the hospital in an emergency C-section. And so, it was like one of those episodes from a doctor's, from one of those doctor TV shows where we walk in and everybody's waiting on us because we just come from the doctor's office, and at the hospital they're all waiting on us. And they whisked my wife away, and they did an emergency C-section. I called it a gas and gut. They just put her under general anesthesia with gas, and they just cut her open and got the baby out because the baby was in distress. So my son, who the other story, he's 19, he's good, but he was born and he made no attempt to do anything on his own. So they take me in this little room that I didn't know existed, but apparently, if you know anything about hospitals, there's these rooms that they take you away so you're not in the public waiting room because your situation's bad. So they took me in that little room, and I'll never forget, I've never met the guy beforehand, and I've not met him since, but I remember his last name, he was named Dr. Toffoletto. And Dr. Toffoletto came in and he said, Mr. Bailey, I'm the doctor on call. I'm trying to take care of your son. And I'm going to tell you, he's making no attempts to live on his own. He's not attempted to breathe. He's not attempted to open his eyes. He's laying lifeless on our table. I'm doing everything we can to take care of him, but we don't know what's wrong, and we're trying to revive him. But I'm going to tell you, Mr. Bailey, it doesn't look good. He's probably not going to make it. So, as I'm sitting there, I'm, this hope and this excitement about having your firstborn, about all these hopes and dreams and everything that you've ever dreamed about having a kid and how you're going to be better than all your other friends at parenting, and that your kids are going to be the best athletes and your kids are going to be the best students, and all these things that you quietly think to yourself and you don't say to anybody else, but you know, like for me, I played baseball and football, so I was going to impart this great amount of wisdom to my kids on how to hit the ball and all that stuff. So anyway, I'm sitting there and now I'm thinking, where am I going to bury him? That's what I was thinking. So what he said, now the other thing, Mr. Bailey, we've called Children's Hospital. At the time, my wife and I were living in Morristown, Tennessee. He said, we've called Children's Hospital, but I'm going to tell you, even if they take the helicopter, it'll take them an hour to get here because they have to get all their people together and get everything together, get all their supplies. He said, I don't think he's got that much time. So, so I'm sitting there thinking, where am I going to bury him? My wife's under general anesthesia. She has no idea what's going on. There's nobody here. I mean, it was a bad situation, very dire. And so all these things I had hoped, and you can apply this to any situation in your life, including planning a church. All these things I had hoped would happen, I was facing death instead. So, 5 minutes later, 5 minutes, maybe less than, Dr. Toffoletto came back in the room and he said, Mr. Bailey, I cannot explain this, but Children's Hospital is already here. Now, that's not even feasible. They were in Knoxville. We were in Morristown. As a drive, it was an hour plus away. With a helicopter, I don't know, they could have got there faster, but nobody can get there in 5 minutes. And what we found out later, in Morristown, Tennessee, there are 2 hospitals that are directly across the street from each other. We were in this hospital, and earlier that day, someone had called Children's to come and pick up a baby at the other hospital. Children's got all their people together, all their doctors, all their nurses, all their supplies, and they drove their ambulance down. And when they pulled in, they got a call that said, baby's found, we don't need you anymore. At the same time, they got the call from us.
Wow.
So they just pulled out and went over here. So there are things in life that you cannot explain. And God does those things. God is, and I heard many of you say, I love seeing what God can do that you cannot explain. They had in their ambulance a neonatal doctor who specialized in this particular condition that my son had, which they found out later. My wife's umbilical cord had got something messed with it, and so over the course of like 2 weeks, his blood leaked into her body. So he just lost all his blood. So when he was born, he had lost 89% of his blood volume. So he was just laying there, pasty white, lifeless. So the doctor knew what to do, took care of it. Went and told my wife as she was coming out of it. He said, Mama, you've done nothing wrong. There's nothing you could have done to prevent this. Took him to Children's. And they told us, they said, look, with that kind of blood loss, you're looking at some pretty bad, if he even makes it, you're looking at some pretty bad years ahead. So I go to Children's. I left my wife at the hospital. Her mom had gotten there at that time. And I went in the hospital with Children's, and then the doctor told us when we got there, he said, we've done some brain scans. Your son's had some brain bleeds, which means that, you know, your brain's the most important organ, and so everything else is shut down. He may never use the bathroom like normal people or whatever. It's going to be bad if he even makes it. So I went out to the parking lot at about midnight that night at Children's Hospital. And after everybody had gone, there was this big flood of people that was supporting us and encouraging us and loving us. And I went out to Children's Hospital, and I said out loud to God, I said, God, how on earth can your kingdom be furthered through this death? Because, see, I had prayed that our kids would further God's kingdom. That was one of my prayers. So I said, how can your kingdom be furthered through this boy's death? And I was pretty emotional. What God reminded me of was when I was a little boy, my dad's wife, my birth mother, my biological mother, she got a sinus infection, and 2 weeks later she was dead. And my dad, after agonizing over the death of his wife and leaving 2 small children, God called him to preach. And who knows how many people have been positively affected because my dad answered the call, a very strong call to preach, and left his secure job in the school system and went to be a bivocational pastor, and then left and was full-time. God said to me, I know this is not how you write it up, but when your mom passed away, my kingdom was further. Your dad's life is different through that. Not a great situation, but that's how I used it. And then, of course, you know, he kind of reminded me of his own son, Jesus, whose death was not the end all and be all either. So I said to the Lord, I said, Lord, you're right. And I took my hands as though I had my son in my hands. I took the hands and I said, he's yours. And there is nothing like being where the whole world thinks that you are in the worst case scenario. And Scripture comes roaring in and says, there is peace that passes all understanding. There is a peace that you cannot explain. It passes your ability to understand it. It goes beyond your ability to understand it, but there's peace. And that's what I pray for all you guys, because I know what you're doing is tough. I know that you're out there and you're fighting against the world who doesn't want you to succeed. And I'm praying that in the midst of the worst days, the days where people are turning away and leaving your church and whatever, that you will find a peace that passes all understanding, because we serve the same God. Amen. And I believe that each one of you can tell me a story similar to the one I just told you, where God showed you something that you can go, man, He's real. He loves me so much that I will serve Him for the rest of my life. And I will do whatever He wants me to do. If it means leaving banking and going into church administration, or if it means leaving being a principal of a high school and being a bivocational pastor, or if it means leaving a factory job and being a church planter, whatever it is, I will do it for you, Lord. And so with that call and with that drive and with that, this is what God's called me to do. With all that, I just encourage you to just be sure and take care of your people. You owe it to them because God's called you to do it. That's all I got.
Questions?
Yes.
You got time?
I've got a few minutes, yes. I went a little longer than I went to. I got to preaching myself. What questions do y'all have?
Lee, what do you think is the biggest risk if it's not addressed? I mean, is it embezzlement? Is it bankruptcy? Is it, well, as these guys are starting out and maybe they're offering for $7 a month. I mean, well, what do you see as the biggest risk if they're, you know, starting out? And what do they need to be aware of?
Well, personally, I think the biggest risk that we deal with all the time is that we are constantly trying to stay on top of is child protection. Just child protection. Just not putting yourself or your church in a position that you're going to regret.
So what are some basic principles for child protection for this?
You know, you want to have 2 people in every room that aren't married. Because a husband and wife are going to stand up for each other no matter what the act was. So you want to have 2 people in every room that aren't married. And then if you happen to take kids to a bathroom, then you want to make sure that there's multiple people in there. You want to make sure that a teenage boy is not taking a young boy to the bathroom by himself. You know, these are all things that if you applied this to your own kids, if you've got a 7-year-old daughter, just put yourself in those shoes. If you've got a 7-year-old daughter, would you want an 18-year-old boy being the only teacher of her class? No matter how good this kid is, no matter how good a kid he is, he just doesn't need to be in a position where he's by himself.
Anymore, I don't want an 18-year-old daughter. I mean, 18-year-old girl being the only person.
Right. So that principle of isolation is important. You just cannot get away from risk going up as people get by themselves. If you can be by yourself in a hallway with one other person, if you can be by yourself in an office with one other person, you can be by yourself counting money with one other person. I mean, if you can be by yourself and have any kind of opportunity, that principle of isolation, increasing risk, is key. And that's what now I understand we have a big church, but we find ourselves in those situations even now, where for a while our student pastor's office was in a separate building. And so just somebody dropping in on him, a teenage girl, I mean, red flags and horns and everything going off. And it doesn't matter how plutonic or if it's a youth intern, you just can't be by yourself. You just can't do it. And so, yes.
What about, we're small, you know, your church plant, you start out small, you grow, you hire staff. And say you have, just throw this out there, 4 staff people, 2 of them are women, 2 of them are men, none of them are married. But church plants flow different. They're probably part-time, they come in when they can, you've got a facility, like you're there studying one day, and the part-time children's girl comes in to make copies and y'all 2 are the only 2 in the building. Do you leave?
That is a great question.
I mean, you know what I mean? That's kind of some of the stuff we've dealt with.
Right, that is a great question, and I have dealt with this a couple different times. The executive pastor that I've mentored under in East Tennessee, if he knew that anybody was going to be in the office with him, he called somebody and said, "Come in here for the next 20 minutes or so." He would call a friend, he'd call anybody to come in and just hang out with him until that person was gone. I just think that there is, in that situation, if the children's person comes in to make copies, if they're going to be there for 15 minutes, you just go take a coffee break.
Yeah.
You just don't put yourself in a situation.
So
unless you've got great cameras.
In your office
unless you've got great cameras.
Okay.
If you've got a great camera system, then you're probably going to, you will protect yourself with that. It doesn't protect you from accusation, but it would protect you from, at the end, you getting in trouble because you would have proof that nothing happened. But just, I've heard it said Billy Graham never got on an elevator with another female. And I've even heard it said that when Billy Graham would go to a hotel room, he would take the TVs out, have the TVs removed. And somebody called him one time and said, "Dr. Graham, the cords of the TV are built into the drywall." And his response was, I would rather repair a room than have to repair my reputation. So,
I feel the same about the refrigerator.
Good day.
so, those are hard. Those are hard situations to know exactly what to do. If you're right in the middle of something, when you got that great point, you're about to tone down, and somebody walks in, it's just you and another female.
Yeah.
But man, your commitment to personal integrity and your calling, that one thing can.
You'll be wishing you had.
You know, my dad. There was a young lady in my dad's church who I forget what she needed, but she needed to go pick up a car title or go pick up something, and there wasn't anybody to take her. And my dad took her, and I remember thinking, Dad, for what? In the world are you thinking?
Yeah.
He was a 65-year-old man taking an 18-year-old or a 16-year-old daughter, a young lady, to go pick up something in Knoxville. They were in the car for maybe 30 minutes together. And I remember thinking, that is the biggest, craziest thing. I cannot believe you did that. Take Mom with you. I mean, do something. Pick up a hitchhiker. Do something where you're not in the car alone with her. Because a ministry that spans over decades and decades can be ruined with one accusation.
Yep.
I was just going to say that even before stepping out now, there is no church building, so I don't have that part to worry about. It's just my home. But I had an office, I had the glass on my window, all those things that we used to say you needed to do. But I got thinking today someone could still make an accusation. They could say, nowadays they could say, you said something or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, really. And so I'm really at a point to where, when it comes to a female, for instance, how do I handle that situation? And again, I mean, I know you don't do it alone, but that's not my point. I'm saying you're just in a crazy age, though, where somebody could say anything. Oh,
on social media.
And by the way, it might be a guy that makes an accusation or something that goes up too. So I'll just tell you, it's one that I wish some administrative guys could come up. I mean, I've heard the Billy Graham story. I don't say it bad, but I'm just saying it's kind of like, how do you do this? Because now I'm kind of thinking, if I'm going to talk to you, well, let's just meet at the Well Coffee House. And then there's people sitting around and whatever. I mean, but I'm just saying all the way around, it is a crazy world. And you're right, you're trying to minimize the risk for yourself and your church. But yet, it's getting so extreme, it's really hard to figure out how to actually talk to somebody.
And I'll tell you, this trend of having meetings in coffee shops, dude, I'm telling you, I didn't have my first cup of coffee until I was in my 30s. And I hated it, and I spent another 10 years waiting until I had another cup. And this entire this trend of meeting in coffee shops is really great for accountability. I mean,
because there's people around.
It puts you. You're no longer in an office where you can be by yourself.
You see me at my office all the time. You call it Chick-fil-A. So yeah.
Right.
Right. Tough on you. Checkbook if you're a church planner. And I remember getting invited out to lunch as a church planner and just praying that the guy offered to pay for it, because if not, I was going to catch it when I got home. It's like, you went out to lunch? Don't you know $7 would break our budget? It's like, yeah. Can I say one thing? Because one thing, Josh, that I've done in those situations where you can't do anything to plan around it and it happens. It's like you wind up and you thought you were, I'm just trying to think of it. Somebody, here's a good one, happens to be regular. It's like, I'm pulling over the side of the road because there's a woman broke down on the side of the road. And for me, I always think, if that's my wife, I want an honest man of God helping her, right? But again, you're putting yourself in a place of risk. So what I do now is, if I'm pulling over, I call my wife. If she's not there, I call somebody from church and I say, hey, it's 7:02. If you'll mark that, I'm pulling over to help somebody with their car. I'm at mile marker 273. I'm going to leave the phone on the whole time on speakerphone while I help this person change their tire. That may sound a little extreme, but I'm telling you, I pulled over one time to help a gal. She had her scrubs on, and I came over to help her. I was like, what do you need? She said, I need help with my tire. I said, okay, got the keys, got the tire out, went back to hand her keys. Her top was off. She was sitting in her brassiere, And she's like, I could also use some other things. So what do you do in that moment? It's like, oh snap, you know, and I was like, what do you do? I mean, all she had to do was make an accusation at that point, and I could be ruined. So I get on the phone now, and I get on the phone with my wife or somebody else from the church before I get out of my car. So
That's not, I don't think that is going overboard at all.
I think you gotta do something, guys, because the devil wants to steal, kill, and destroy everything. There was a minister where I grew up, faithful minister of God. They had a preschool in their building, and whenever they were short a teacher, they'd call him and say, "Hey, can you come down until so-and-so comes in 45 minutes?" And so he would just do that on occasion. Accusations came out that he had sexually molested a kid. Went through like 5 years of mitigation, and he was finally declared innocent. But for 5 years, his name was run through the mud. He can't get a job. You're in ministry. Your family's ruined. Your children's relationships are ruined. You know, your dad's known as a child molester. You can't leave town because you got to keep going back to court. Where do you get the money for the defense lawyer? I mean, and he was trying to do the good thing. He was trying to help out. But he put himself in a place of risk. So you may think these stories are over the top, and Billy Graham was over the top, say I'll get out of an elevator if it's a single woman. But all it takes is that woman opening the door, having somebody there from National Enquirer with her shirt pulled off, going, and they take the picture, it's on the National Enquirer, and you can't recover from that. You can say it was staged, you can say everything you want, but people lie like a rug these days. For $1,000, they'll say anything. Don't put yourself in that situation.